Welcome to the Pastors Podcast, Season 8. Great to have you with us. We're at it again, Season 8. I don't know what that means. We're either getting better or something's happening, but it's great to have you with us. We are actually recording this season of Pastors Podcast at our Pastors Conference in Sacramento. We're on day 3 here. It's been a phenomenal time. I don't know if I'm biased. You know how well, I'm pretty critical, so sometimes I look at my stuff and think it's not that good, but I think what we do here at Pastors Conference is so phenomenal. We do one here in Sacramento area every January, and then we do one in London for the UK and for Europe in May. We'd love to have you come out for that. Excited to have a conversation with some great friends, people that we've been running in ministry, all of you guys for decades now that we've been running together. I'm going to go around real quick, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do.
My name's Paul Geerling. I've been married 30 years to Joanne. I have 2 boys and a grandchild.
Yeah, you do.
I pastor in Brisbane in Australia.
I heard the greatest phrase about grandchildren. It was that grandchildren are God's reward for not killing your children or something like that. It was just so...
That's true.
It's like grandchildren is God's reward for not killing your children. I thought so fantastic. Go ahead.
My name is Donna Lasit and been married also almost 30 years. 3 kids. They're grown mostly and incredible. Some of them are working on ministry with us in our church, and we planted the Pearl Church in Denver, Colorado 15 years ago. Just now, 15 years ago. So.
Great church out there. We love you guys. And Lyle, you've been on the podcast before. This is not the first time, but go ahead.
Lyle Wells. I'm the president of Integris Leadership. I'm also the pastor of First Baptist Church in Franklin, Texas. I've been married 35 years. I mean, think about that. I mean, there is 100 years of wisdom, marriage wisdom, more than 100 sitting here. So, and I don't think we're going to mention marriage at all.
No, not at all. How long? You've pastored a few times, yes?
I have. I was the founding pastor of a church in Lakeland, Florida, or just outside of Lakeland, Florida, for several years, and then took over this, a much different 147-year-old church with a lot of sacred cows.
147 years old.
Amazing.
Yeah, 147 years old. It's essentially you're planting a church with 34,000 square feet of buildings, millions of dollars in the bank, no debt, and a whole bunch of sacred cows walking around.
That sounds fun.
It's amazing.
I've heard it's almost harder sometimes because when we planted, you are constructing things but not having to deconstruct anything. You're not having to dismantle. You're building things, but you don't have to dismantle anything. Man, I'd be going to church. I'd be like, all right, guys, I think I'd cause whiplash. I'm sure as I get older, I'm a little bit more wise and measured, but because I'd be like, yeah, we're not doing that. Yep, we're killing that. Yep, shouldn't have been doing that for 30 years. Like, I would just be dismantling stuff. Have you had to, really discipline yourself not to dismantle things?
Yeah, there's a discipline that comes with it, and there's some wisdom. What you don't know is all the old stories. I mean, you can say a phrase in a sermon that will trigger people that, and you're like, I had no idea, that a pastor who walked out in the middle of a message 30 years ago, and, he was talking about that, and, you just realize, but here's the thing. When you walk into a place that has legacy and history, even if some of it's messy, there's ownership. People love their community. Totally. They love their church.
Yeah, that's right.
And I mean, they're committed to it. And so you just have to maybe go a little slower than when you're the founding pastor.
Yeah, totally.
And, and you're like, I want this and I want this.
Yeah.
And a few more conversations. But I mean, they're conversations that are an investment of time and not a spend. Because once they come with you, look out.
Yeah, that's
and you
amazing.
need to redig the well, find out how that church started. I found that when you take on a church, I try and do a bit of history work. How did it start? What happened? Because beginnings are always important.
Yeah.
And what was the precedent started? What was the founding pastor's message? And I think that really it's like undigging an old well,
Right. Yeah, I think what Paul does is harder than even what we're doing because, churches are integrating into your church now, and that combine of cultures, that's like a blended family, and that's got to be really, really interesting.
Pioneering is a different faith muscle, taking on a church, and then merging into a church family is a different faith muscle
Absolutely.
again.
Well, one of the things that I want to talk about, and to be honest with you, when we sit down and plan out the sessions that we're going to do, I really just want to come alongside pastors and help them. I want to encourage them, equip them, provoke them, challenge them, but also, just help them get where they're supposed to go. And so I hesitated a little bit saying, let's have a conversation around betrayal. Partly because it's real. I know it's real, and we're going to have that conversation. But we just were in a great session with Andrew Gard, who's a little bit like,
Brilliant.
stop feeling sorry for yourself. Like, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Even, Donna, what you shared this morning at the conference is
was
a
prophetic.
little bit like, hey, we're shepherds, man. This is what we do. We lay our lives down. So sometimes I feel like as pastors, we can feel sorry for ourselves. We can have pity parties. We can feel like what we do is harder than anybody else. And so I don't want to go there.
Right.
At the same time, what pastors walk through is a unique situation. We pour our lives into people.
Yep.
We spiritually pour in. We walk with them. We build friendships, even on staff. We don't have staff that are employees. We have staff that we may not use the word family because it gets so convoluted in what that means, but these are people that we're invested in on a spiritual level,
Yep.
on a relational level. And so you've got staff, you've got people. We were even in here saying, do I even call it betrayal? Paul's like, I don't think we should call it betrayal. And Donna's like, well, I think that's what it feels like. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're even here saying, like, whatever this thing is, where there's broken relationships, where there's people that leave, where there's offense that comes in. And like, I have relationships that I walked with people closely for 20 years that it is broken right now.
Yeah.
And people that have left just with such a weird perspective and blame me and are offended at me or whatever else. I don't even know what we call it. Is betrayal the right word?
Yeah, I think it's such a disruption because of the investment that it's going to feel like a betrayal. But what it really is ultimately is it's somebody has made a decision, and a lot of times that decision has very little to do with us.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we get egotistical and think it's all about me, and it's rarely about you.
It's pointed at me though.
Well, but Banning, think about it. I mean, if somebody's having a challenging life, maybe their marriage is less than stellar. Maybe they're not loving their work. They're not going to go home and start yelling at their wife or their husband because you know what? It's not great, but having them there is better than being alone.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to go yell at my boss because, particularly here in California, gas is $5 a gallon.
Yeah.
I need my job.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to go yell at my teacher of my kids because they might flunk my kid and my kid can't go to college. But boy, I can show up to church and get angry at my pastor because he's supposed to give me grace.
Yeah.
I can pick up an offense there or pick up my friend's offense here.
Yeah,
and now I can kind of give full vent to that anger, and with really feeling you can't fire me. You're supposed to love me.
Yeah.
You have to give me an audience.
Yeah.
And I think people feel a license to maybe take a little bit of what's happening in their life out on you, their pastor. You're the guy on stage. You're the guy that looks like you have it all together.
Yeah.
Donna and Doug, I've been to your church. You two look like you have the perfect marriage. I doubt that that's true. I'm sure you have an amazing marriage.
Yeah. Have you met Doug?
He's a little Andrew.
Have you met Doug? I'm pretty sure.
So the fact that we become targets at times, you preached a great message the other night. Stop being surprised.
Yeah.
People are going to look for a target.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it's the one on stage on Sunday morning.
So how have you guys navigated, I think we would all have stories of both people above us, beside us, and below us at some level.
Yep.
It's not always people following us. Sometimes it's been people that we were following or friends and things like that. How have you navigated keeping your heart tender before the Lord?
Right.
Yeah.
Having, I guess, somewhat what would be thick skin, but a soft heart type concept. How have you kept your heart tender before the Lord, walking through ministry and the years that you have where there has been, and we'll use the word betrayal, whatever it would be, just that thing of like, this is wrong.
Yep.
And this is hurtful. Or how have you navigated that and kept your heart tender?
I think that probably nothing has made me want to quit more than personal breakdowns in a relationship. Like, give me hard work, give me all those things. But I think one of the enemy's tool is to bring breakdowns in a relationship, because nothing makes me as a leader want to call it quits than that. And I think it's interesting. It's like hard when you've gone through what feels like betrayal personally, when people that you've invested so much time in, you've dedicated their babies, you've prayed for them, you've been there 24 hours a day, and then, there's a failed expectation or something, and all of a sudden it goes south.
Fence comes in,
Yeah, fence comes in, and it's like you can't, I've had many things said to me like, well, you're in the power position, and so, it's like we're in this place where you can't win, right? And I remember, a few years ago where I could feel, don't you hate as pastors, you have a gut feeling another betrayal's coming, or you have a gut feeling and you're like, I don't want to be right. I don't want to be right.
I still coming out of COVID, it was pretty brutal in some of this areas. I still, this day, somebody's like, can we meet? I'm like, ooh, all right, am I about to have another conversation? Because I've had these conversations now. Yeah, totally.
And I feel like it's tempting to be like, I'm going to withhold my heart. Like, I actually don't want to go there again. And I remember, not too long ago where I was in a situation I could kind of sense it coming. Something was coming.
Yeah.
And we were going to a retreat, and I was like, God, I'm just going to call this person on the phone and uninvite them to this retreat because it's a leadership retreat and we need unity and blah, blah, blah. And the Lord just said, stop for a minute. And I was like, no, I think that's good leadership, like to separate, so I'm like wrestling with these things. And I felt like the Lord said, just walk for a minute. So I stood up and I was like walking around. And I just said, God, I just need you to speak to me. Am I supposed to uninvite this person, or am I supposed to invite him? And like I said, God uses pictures. And that quick, a picture drops in to my head, which was maddening. And it was the Last Supper. And there Jesus was at the table, and I saw this picture of him sitting with Judas right there, eating together. And I felt like, and this isn't the case for every situation, but felt like the Lord said, are you willing to keep this individual at the table knowing that you can sense something drawing in there? And I felt like in that moment, it was like that heart motive was like God knowing that that's going to happen and it's going to hurt. Can you still sit there in that tension and keep your heart soft, knowing that God is asking you to do that again and again? I think as pastors and leaders, it's going to happen again. Like I wish to say, now I've learned this lesson from that situation, this lesson from that situation, but I promise you it's going to happen again. And can you say, Lord, I choose this still, even yet, knowing that on the other side there was a breakdown in relationship, which in that case there totally was, and I did see it coming. But I felt like it helped me stay in that posture. When I see Christ, he did it knowing, and he chose to stay in it knowing.
And when it's an individual, I think it's so cutting to you, but then you got to always put up the example of Christ. How many times have we let him down?
Yeah, totally.
And then also the way he treats the disciples. Peter denied him 3 times, and he still said, "I love you and feed my sheep." But like Donna said, it's going to continue to happen till we get taken home to glory. But I think the other thing for me is that also when you want to, as a pastor, we want to make things right. We like reconciliation. One of the hardest things is when someone is offended or secondary offense. I don't even know why they're offended. It's unresolved. And you want it. And many times God said to me, just let it go. And 3 or 4 years later, there's been an opportunity to resolve it because they're not ready to resolve it. You're ready to resolve it. But I think one of the other things which you mentioned before, like COVID, but for us, one of the most challenging things for me as a youth pastor, as a senior pastor, I'd only ever seen growth. Everything I touched went up. And then in 7 years into our church, we had a massive flood in our city. 70,000 homes got flooded. And our building had 7 foot of water go through it. It was just destroyed. And I went to do insurance, and they're saying, we don't know how long this claim's going to come. And I remember I thought I was being a good pastor, and I sent a letter out 3 weeks later at Easter saying, guys, these are the 3 options. Either we're going to get insurance claim and refurbish the building, or maybe we'll knock the building down, build a new one, or go somewhere else. And I thought that would be just a good pastor communicating. It set off an explosion of people leaving my church. And every week, my wife and I were having a coffee, and at the end, I don't want to have a coffee with anybody, because the coffee would go like this: we love you and Joe, we love the vision of this church, but we just don't want to be part of a set down, pack up church, and we just feel God telling us to go to the church down the road. And at that time, a big church had opened in our city, an international church, and a big friend of ours opened, and people it was just bleeding. And I'm like, if I have another coffee with someone's telling me they're going to leave, I'm going to get this plastic fork and stab myself in the eye, because I didn't want to see anybody. But it wasn't, and working through that, our church halved, our tithes halved. But it was probably one of the greatest moments of my life. We revisioned the church, we sat down and restructured. But it was more about, it wasn't actually personal. I took it personally, but they were just thinking, I got 4 kids.
Well,
I don't want to drive in the city. Hey, Hillsong's just opened down the road. There's a beautiful building here. I'm going to go here.
Yeah.
And they weren't inviting my people to my church.
And this is the hard part too, because during COVID,
you just don't have any control.
They wouldn't know, like, and this can be so dramatic. and COVID wasn't just COVID for me. The Lord was actually doing something in our midst,
Absolutely.
to set us up for what He wanted to do. So it was like a lot of people went through hard times with COVID
for us.
But you know, I feel like, dude, I am bleeding on the ground. And then you're having this conversation. I feel like in my time, and they wouldn't know that I'm bleeding on the ground, right? In my time of greatest need, when I need you the most to be able to, you're like, hey, yeah, all right, I'm out of here, you know? And, you know, you don't know what's going on, but still it's hard not to go like.
But I think in us, like Donna said about inviting that person to the table, the ability, the grace, the maturity to release people. And I learned this early on. I had
Which is the heart of a father.
Incredible musician, incredible work. I invested so much time, sound guy, and they all got offended by someone else. They didn't know what the fence. And I just felt God say, bless them. They've given this so much to this church. I was angry about what they were upset about because it was ridiculous. And you know what the amazing thing was? 4 years later, they came back to the church. And I'm more committed to the church.
Wow.
But if I had burned them on the way out, if I had isolated them, if I had blamed them, if I had humiliated them by my conversation with other people, they could never have come back. And you know, I think that's a big lesson that I learned early on, to let go lightly. They're God's people, not mine.
I remember Danny asking me one time, he goes, because a guy was mad at me, and it was a staff guy. They'd been around for a long time. And in my opinion, was just acting childish and petty and like, you know, whatever, and wouldn't respond. And I'm just like, I don't have time for this. Like, I am not interested in moving towards you or whatever else. And Danny just said, well, I mean, what would you do if you were a father?
Wow.
Wow, that changes
I'm
everything.
like, well, I don't know. I wouldn't listen to you right now. That's what I wouldn't have a conversation with you. That's what I would. But, you know, it was that kind of like, and I thought, oh, okay, if I really can stay in that, because it is that thing then. Somebody leaves the church and like, really, ultimately what I want is for you to be somewhere thriving, plugged in.
Yes.
I don't necessarily like, and I actually am not somebody who thinks everybody has to be at our church the rest of their life. I actually don't think you're disloyal. I think how you leave matters and all that type of stuff. But I'm like, if the Lord wants to move you, He can move you. Like, I'm not, you know, I don't use these are my people. I don't ever think that. So I have a theology and a philosophy that says, yes, if the Lord wants to move, or sometimes people move because they can get a need met there they can't hear, or different seasons.
But it's hard because as a pastor, sometimes you've got to speak truth.
Yes. But it is kind of that thing, all right, so I want to stay in that, but how they leave, or they're mad or offended or whatever else, or it's the relationships, it's just hard. It's hard to navigate that.
I think, you know, Andrew just mentioned about making mountains, that, you know, I mean, we're all intuitive leaders. And I think being preemptive, you know, when I start to sense, like, I don't know that they're all the way in right now. I mean, I'll sit with them. And, you know, remember that every behavior is symptomatic of something. And so, you know, if it was Donna, and I noticed, you know, Donna, you've stepped off of, you know, volunteering for this group, or I don't see you, you know, you were an every Sunday couple, and now you're kind of, you know, is everything okay? Tell me what's going on. And, you know, we've had those. I mean, I stepped into my church a couple of years ago, and I mean, you can tell there were families that, you know, they gave the new guy a while, but now, you know, I'm not as Baptist as some of them want me to be, you know, I mean, whatever it is. And I can sit with them and say, you know, what's happening? And that's where I start, you know, to lay the groundwork of, listen, if you're going to leave, because Banning, I share your heart. I don't think we're the place for everybody. And I think we might be the place for certain people for a season. But if you're going to leave, can we covenant together right now as adults, as brothers and sisters in Christ? Let's make sure you leave well. You know, and let's talk about what that looks like. Is there a time frame? Because if you're telling me you and your husband have already talked about it, you know, and I just had a conversation like that a few weeks ago, and she said, well, we're going to give it through the spring semester because of our boys. And I'm like, great. You know, and then let's keep the conversation open, because I do think we do become a little bit gun shy, and then you're like, oh, I don't want to have another conversation. But, you know, to me, those conversations prepare us for a better outcome, even if it's leaving, it's well. Because here's the other thing, you know, everybody talks about the 99 and the 1, but the way we treat the 1 impacts the 99.
That's so good.
And so, that's really important to me, that if somebody leaves, I'm not going to say a negative word about them. Mm-hmm. I'm going to honor them if honor is still due. I mean, we had a children's leader that left, and we've had this unique trend of baptizing young people in our church. And every time I baptize a young person, I acknowledge that they were discipled in the ministry of this person who's no longer part of our church and not really a fan of our church, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Because it's still on me to give honor where honor's due.
Yeah.
What helps me sleep at night is I realize that the way people treat you have a lot more to do with who they are and how they're doing than who you are and how you're doing.
Yep.
I think for me as well, I have to recognize, and I think this is the work that we have to do as pastors, that the insecurities I have, like half the time I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job. Like just pastoring you look at some pastors and you're like, I don't know, whatever you do seems to just be huge and big and you do it like pretty easily, it feels like. But for everybody else, we're just trying to plug away. And many times it's slow growth if as far as numerically, if growth at all and not that type of stuff. And so as a leader, I'm like, am I doing a good job? Am I not doing a good job? Am I winning? Am I not winning? But that's going on inside of me. So when somebody either is mad at me or wants to leave or whatever else, I am beginning to go, it is a commentary on, yes, I already feel like I'm not doing a good job. And it's kind of, you know what I mean? And I think that's we have to, it's going to be hard to navigate in a healthy way. We're putting a lot into betrayal, but it's gonna be hard to navigate in a healthy way. People that have a problem with you, people that leave, relationships that break down. If you're not actually finding your confidence in the Lord, finding your assurance from the Lord, because when I'm like, I already don't feel like I'm winning. I already am not sure I'm doing a good job. And you kind of leaving and upset kind of is just touching that thing inside of me, which I think is unfair to them.
Yep. For sure. I think, I, unlike Andrew, am a natural people pleaser.
So Andrew, guys, for context, this morning Andrew said, Andrew's a phenomenal pastor in Lakeland, Florida, has a great church, it's thriving, growing, but he kind of has this thing where he kind of doesn't care what you think about him. Like he just naturally is like, I actually don't care what you think about me. And so he said it's a curse and a blessing. So we were talking about, so you actually do care what people think about you.
And so it just stabbed me. But I think if I could go back, we're 15 years into the church, if I could tell my former self as the first set of betrayals came, I was like, if I look back, every betrayal sharpened me, made me a better leader, and every betrayal in some way, I don't know if you guys experienced it, but has taken the lid off our ministry, off of our church. And the wild thing about that is that, I think about Joseph, and it went beyond forgiveness. Like we as leaders, even as was shared this morning, we have to forgive. But to me, it's like even another step past forgiveness that has been helpful for me. Yes, I forgive you. I'm not looking at you with malice. I'm not talking about you or whatever it is. But also, can I get to that place where I thank the Lord for it and say, actually, like Joseph, God sent me, to his brothers who had put him in the pit, and actually say, in some way, the Lord put me here ahead of you to actually save the people that hurt me, that is another level. And I think
you meant it for evil, but God was actually
God was doing it. And I think if I look back now,
which is our problem.
Yes.
God, I got a problem with God.
So take your issue up with God. And I wish I could go back and stop fighting that person and say, good. God, what are you doing in me? What are you doing in our church? Why is that a lid for me? Take actually something. I think that helps me when I'm in the middle of it, be like, okay, remember, 10 years from now, I'm going to look back and be like, thank you, God, because actually maybe that person on leadership was holding us back, or, and I was fighting so hard to keep it or fighting so hard to fix it or whatever. And the Lord was like, trust me in the journey that all of these things I'm working in, not just that person, take the name out,
And I think too, when it happens on staff, it's a bigger deal to you.
And absolutely.
And these are the ones that probably hurt the most.
And I think too, it's like sometimes we don't realize we're fearful if they leave what's going to happen, but sometimes they might be blocking. growth. They might be holding the organization hostage to their personality. And one of the things I think over time I've learned to be better at, because I've made some good mistakes, and is having that conversation continue. How are you going? Where are you feeling? Where would you feel like you're going to be in 5 or 10 years? Because I don't want it to be a surprise. A couple of guys I realized early on my team, I realized they're not going to be with me forever. Yeah. There's going to come a point. On some, I think they're going to be lifers. So if I regularly having that once a year, having a coffee, how you going? One guy we talked about. And so when he came to me 7 years later and said, I feel it's time for me to leave and take a church, I could be part of the conversation because I made it safe for him to talk about the future outside of my world, that he wasn't being disloyal, talk about it. I didn't want him to talk about all the stuff, but he knew he could come and talk to me about where that's going. And I think that's a big thing. And but then we still have, you come to a point where someone leaves and it's an offense of something, they throw a few hand grenades down the aisles, they leave the staff, but you've got to rely that your credibility and your track record in the church is holding you up, and it does on the staff. But I think if the staff know they can come and talk to you if they feel a stirring, because sometimes they can't interpret what God is saying.
That's good.
And you can say, well, hey, I know a friend, you could go here. I gave one of my pastors to a friend, and he's become their greatest 2IC, but you got to have that struggle and that strain, because sometimes you can feel there's a loss, but maybe it's a win. Yeah. And but I still think we're always going to be open. We're believing in people, releasing people. We're all going to be in a place where we're going to be surprised when someone leaves.
I find for me, maybe it's just me, but when I start feeling sorry for myself in these moments, like I really do try to live with the as much as depends on me, be at peace with all men.
Right.
And so, but that thing that starts getting in there where I feel justified in not moving towards somebody, right? And I begin to believe, or I feel like I'm powerless, can't really do anything about it, whatever else, and I feel justified. I kind of like sitting in it. I mean, it kind of feels a little comforting to sit in that I've been wronged or I feel justified. And just that thing, just to say, no, listen, if there's something you can do, then do it.
Yeah.
Move towards them. I mean, we tell our people this all the time. As far as John Maxwell, I think it was in John Maxwell's book, first time I read it, but I don't, for whatever reason, it stuck with me since I was 20-something. Like, leaders don't wait for phone calls, they make phone calls.
Right.
So trying to teach our own leaders, hey, listen, don't wait for a phone call, make a phone call. But for me, I just sometimes feel like I feel justified in not making the phone call. And I kind of sit in that pity party, and it could just be me, I don't know. But there is that thing of like, can I actually move towards people? And whatever is dependent on me, I'm going to make sure that I'm moving towards that.
Yeah, we got to guard our heart from a sense of entitlement.
Yeah, and that's probably what it is.
Hey, no. I poured into you, leaders. Now you owe me.
Yeah, that's exactly
the rest of your life. I mean, you're an indentured servant now because, I took you out of Bible college.
You at least owe me not to be annoyed with me. Like, it's like, at least, you don't have to be with me forever, but you can't be offended at me. Yeah, tell me.
So I think that's part of it is our perspective. And I mean, really, ultimately, we're called to be multipliers. If you're going to be a launchpad leader and launch a lot of other people into lives in ministry, some of those trajectories are going to go outside of your sphere of orbit or your sphere of influence. And we've got to be okay with that. We have to understand that it's a dynamic that is happening in the cultures of our churches, on the cultures of our staff. And again, those dynamics are going to change. And I'm with Paul. I think every change is an opportunity. We need to be prepared for that. People are going to leave. Don't be surprised. People are going to leave badly sometimes. Don't be surprised. You talk about, as much as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. I try to be unoffendable. I mean, I just try to work really hard.
I love it.
Not take it personally. And Donna, I love when somebody leaves, I reflect and go, okay, what could I have done better? What should I have done differently? Learn the lesson, close the book, and let's go. I mean, I come out, Ben, and I come out of a college basketball coaching background where,
your favorite phrase is "suck it up."
Yeah, well, but I'm paying 3 guys who really don't want the job that they have. I have 3 assistant coaches who all want to be head coaches. I hope, right? I mean, I would never want an assistant that didn't want to be a head coach.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
Right? But you want to get a little spun up. Go to a game. You're getting ready to play somebody. Your job is on the line, right? And those three are over there trying to make friends with the other head coach and the other assistant coaches because there might be a network opportunity somewhere down the line where they're going to want to have that relationship. And I'm like, no, we don't talk to them. They're the enemy. Like, hey. But that's inherent in that profession.
I love it. Half the time, multiplication happens through this a lot. We're multipliers. I heard of a church that does like a whole church split, and the years down the road, the other church is doing well, and they just kind of count it as a church plant now. Like they just kind of take credit for it. They're like, they were so grateful for the church that came out of us years ago or something else. Like they kind of like, we're just going to take credit for it, not be offended by it, which I absolutely love. I think as well, I think there's a real recognition. So many times God's at work. Like it's what you're talking about. Like we're so offended by this person that's upset with us. And the Lord's like, no, I'm just testing your heart. Like I've actually seen, I don't know how many times I've seen that the Lord was going to transition somebody. Many times it's like, hey, this isn't the right person long-term.
Right.
Or this person is kind of weighing things down or is toxic or whatever else. And so the Lord's like, I'm going to move them because, and most of the time the Lord's talking to me, he's like, I'm playing chess, Banning. He goes, I am 10 moves ahead.
And God likes a win-win.
Yeah. And he goes, and you can only see one move ahead. Right. He said, you can see one move ahead. Right. I'm 10 moves ahead of you right now. So sometimes it's like, I'm going to move somebody because it's what better long-term, but I'm going to make it messy because I want to test your heart in this thing. I want to see if you're going to stay in that place of humility, if you're going to stay in that place of fall, if you're going to stay in that place of love, if you're going to be unoffendable, all that type of stuff. And sometimes I think we're upset with the situation, and God's like, if you want to be upset, you can be upset with me. I am actually trying to reveal some stuff in your heart. I'm trying to test some stuff, ultimately because I'm trying to get you somewhere. And the ability to actually trust the Lord in the process. Let me ask this as we spend the next few minutes as kind of wrapping up. I've asked this quite a bit on the podcast right now, but if there's 10 pastors in the room right now, church leaders in the room, and you just said, hey, here's probably my best advice on how to keep a tender heart. I actually want to stay, I don't know what the word would be, gullible, naive, I don't know how to do it, Like I want to assume the best in people. Yeah. I don't, when somebody falls, has an affair, something that happens that's shocking, that's close, I don't want to then from then on out just look at everybody like, Paul, you might have an affair one day. Like I actually want to I want to assume the best in people. I don't want to look at them like they're going to have an affair now because I have this experience over here. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like because it was so shocking and so painful, I don't want to be shocked again. I'm like, no, I'd rather be shocked. I'd rather be shocked again because my heart is not assuming that. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yep.
So that's the big battle right there. I just want to keep my heart I want to stay humble, not entitled. That's a big one. But how do I keep my heart tender? Where I'm not actually like, hey, you know how I never let down anymore? Nobody can ever get into my heart. Like, that's the thing. You're like, why I never get hurt? Because nobody ever has access to my heart anymore. So my question is how do we keep a tender heart? If you have 10 pastors in here right now, you're going to have a conversation. We're going to go around the circle. Donna, what's like the best advice you've learned on like this, or for you, this is how I keep my heart tender?
I mean, I think I got to, for me personally, after we'd gotten hurt a couple really extreme times where it felt like really personal. The betrayal felt really personal. Of course, we had our part to play as we always do, but it felt unjust. It felt unfair.
None of us think that it's 100% the other person.
None of us do, but it still hurts. And, and I remember I did make that decision where nobody was going to get into my heart. And what happened is it got so dark in my life because I had decided I was going to do life alone, honestly. I was like, I got Doug. I'm good. Like, we're just going to, so I did all the faking. I, made people feel like they were my friends, but nobody actually came into. Yes. And I think I got to the darkest place in my life in that season. And honestly, that is like the thing that reminds, like when I'm tempted, I got to such a dark place. It was the only time. I'm a fairly positive kind of a person where I can see the glass half full. Like we get there, and all of a sudden I was having images, and it was this one period of time where I cried for 24 hours straight, which is not also normal for my personality. Doug was like, what is happening? But I literally had this vision of myself just driving away. It wasn't like suicidal, but I was really dark. I wanted to drive away and never pastor again, never be around people. That was so dark that I think I realized that temptation in us to pull back, and I think that's really an enemy's tool. Jeez. For me, it almost literally took me out. 10 years ago, I literally almost was like, I'm out. Like, you can pastor, but I'm not doing it. And I think that is what keeps me my heart. I'm like, I never want to get back to that place again, because that was the darkest. I was way darker than when you're being betrayed.
Yeah.
Like, living life alone is the worst imaginable. So if you're a pastor and a leader, like, I just want to challenge you. Like, God has meant us to live with one another. We don't have to do it alone, but also I had to reach out to people. I would say, to keep your heart soft, I had to process with some safe people and get to that place where I would be willing to have a friend again. Yeah. So I think for me personally, what I remind myself is like, Lord, don't ever let me get back to there again. And I'd rather run the risk.
Here's your 2 options.
Yeah, here's my 2 options.
Here's your 2 options.
Yeah, the enemy could literally take me out if I don't choose to keep my heart soft towards people.
Yeah. Paul, how do you keep your heart tender in pastoral ministry?
I think what Donna said too, having friends that give you perspective. Now, firstly, my wife will always give me perspective. Put your big boy pants on, all that kind of stuff.
Your wife's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes,
she's very direct.
You got to know Jo. She's direct. She's incredible, and
she's the secret to our church.
She's gonna be Andrew Gard. No empathy at all. Like, Paul, suck it up.
But the other thing is, when that David was at Ziklag, and even the ones he loved were turning upon him, and the Bible says he went away and he encouraged himself in the Lord. And I think it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
So can we be leaders enough that we can encourage ourselves? So what's your go-to, when that happens? Prayer, worship, the word. And then I think the final thing to me is I always have to make my life in comparison to what Christ has done for us. And you look at Philippians 2.
Isn't that the truth?
He says, and look at this example of blah, blah. And that whole chapter, which, we all know, I always go, when I read that, I go, well, what have I got to complain about? Because I compare my life, and Lord, help me to be that example of Christ. And then it's like, if you have a bad Sunday, there's 51 more for the year.
Yeah.
People come and go. And the thing is too, they're sheep. They're called sheep. Yeah. And we don't own them. They're God's sheep. We're just the shepherds. And he can bring them in and he can take them out. And it's probably a perspective thing,
Love that.
Yeah. Benning, you've heard me say this. Paul just reminded me of it. Our process statement at Integris and for our church is this: we want to do hard things with people we really care about, and we want to have fun doing it. And, I think that's what helps keep your heart tender. You're doing hard things, so be humble. You're doing God's work. He doesn't need you, right? I remind myself all the time with this picture, I'm just the kid helping God wash the car, right? And if he didn't have me in the driveway, the car would be cleaner and would be done a lot faster. But a loving father says, no, come help me. And so hard things with people I really care about. And, when we do get betrayed, we've got to remember, there are hundreds or, in the case of your churches, thousands of people who are loyal and love you and show up every Sunday and stand out in the cold and stand out in the rain and greet people and park cars and go in and change diapers. And wait a minute. Let's have a little perspective. So hard things with people we care about and have fun doing it. And the other thing that I think is really a root of bitterness and hardness of heart is comparison.
Yeah.
So when we start looking around, Banning, I know what you went through with COVID.
Yeah.
And we couldn't say the word Texas around you for about 2 years.
I still am
I
angry.
pastor in a community where we pray before the school board meetings. They ask me to give the commencement address, and I'm like, so how careful do I have to be? And they're like, what do you mean?
Careful.
Wow.
And I'm like, I just can talk about whatever I want.
Texas.
And so to everybody that's listening, you're ministering in a unique context with a unique population, in a circumstance that God has ordained for you right here, right now. And so let's be very, very careful about looking to the right or to the left, because that can make us feel insecure. It can make us feel bitter. It can be like, hey, wait a minute.
Exactly right.
Paul doesn't have anybody betraying him. I met him at a conference. That guy looked happy. He's amen and everything, hands going up all the time. He's got it easy at his church, 17 campuses. Yeah. Stop it. Stop it right now.
Yeah.
Right? For such a time as this, Banning Leapshire at Jesus Culture, Paul in Brisbane, Donna and Doug in Denver, and Lyle in Franklin, Texas. This is what God has assigned to us.
Wonderful.
Let's put our hands to the plow and keep our eyes focused.
That's right.
There we go. Guys, thanks for the conversation. Sure appreciate all of you, and thanks for listening. Just so encouraged by just really to be able to have open, honest conversations. It's been good. All right, we'll do it again, guys.